Temis, you can start.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Antonio. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another webinar of the COVID-X project. My name is Themis Anagnostopoulos, and I am a software engineer for Intrasoft International. Today's webinar will be mostly technical, presenting the COVID-X sandbox and all the services that it offers. We will try to keep the presentation as short as possible in order to have more time for questions, for the questions that will follow. Okay. Uh, Sorry about that. There are some issues with the presentation.
If you cannot control, just let me know and I will switch slides.
Yeah, there are some issues when changing the slides. I think it is too slow.
Okay, just let me change it.
Okay.
Task next slide.
Yeah. Can take control. Can you go back to the previous slide with the outline? Okay, thank you. So this is the outline of today's presentation. I will start with a brief introduction to what the sandbox is, and then I will continue with a description of the data ingestion, integration, management, and visualization services that it offers. Then I will pass the floor to my colleagues in order to present the data anonymization process, the Sandbox Security Services, federated learning, and finally the integration layer of third parties, SMEs, and clinical data providers. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with a quick introduction to the Sandbox to have a better understanding of what the Sandbox is. So Sandbox is a multi-layer technological framework. It consists of a set of microservices that are integrated and work together to support a set of services. First of all, it enables seamless access to healthcare information from various heterogeneous data sources. It offers data or metadata management, harmonization, storage, querying, and retrieval services. It also creates a technological framework that allows integration of all the analytics, predictive modeling, or decision support tools, which will come from third parties, and it will give access to all the collected data. This whole integration process will follow the continuous integration, continuous deployment best practices, and the Sandbox actually offers some of the most popular DevOps tools for this purpose. They will be presented later on. Also, Sandbox emphasizes on the data security by adopting all the security principles that will ensure data protection, as well as compliance to GDPR and national regulations. It utilizes virtualization technologies such as cloud computing, containerized environments, and applications in order to permit faster orchestration of the services, of the deployed services, high availability, flexibility, and scalability, and also security by design. Finally, Sandbox allows deployment of federated learning slash validation edge nodes in the targeted hospitals, enabling remote and secure retraining or validation of the relevant AI algorithms over diverse types of data across many data providers. Next slide, please, Antonio. Thank you. So this is the architectural diagram of the sandbox. You can see that it is a completely modular architecture. all the inner boxes represent the different microservices that comprise the sandbox and work together in order to provide a complete technological solution. Each microservice actually is a different sandbox tool that enables a specific sandbox functionality. And they are integrated to create the sandbox service as a whole. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first set of sandbox services that we will see are the data ingestion, integration, management, and visualization services. This is the part of the sandbox architecture that these services cover and the tools that they are using for realizing all these services. Next slide, please. Okay, so regarding the data management services, Sandbox is capitalizing on popular, mostly open source and well-established technologies, such as the Elasticsearch or the ELK stack in general, and MongoDB, in order to provide these services. So firstly, we have the data collection services, which are responsible for extracting and collecting the data from multiple heterogeneous data sources. For this purpose, we mainly use Logstash, Elastic Bits, and some custom software scripts, mostly written in Python or Bash. Then the collected data go through the data harmonization services where they are curated and enriched according to a defined common data model. This data model follows some of the most popular standards in the healthcare data industry, such as HL7 versions 2 or 3, HL7 Fire, ECD11, or DCAT for publishing data sources. The majority of these tasks are implemented by Logstash. Next slide, please. Okay, Sandbox also offers some data management service where after the data and metadata have been curated and annotated, they will be indexed and stored in a centralized repository. This repository acts as a cataloging and search engine that allows fast and complex queries to third-party applications or users. For this purpose, we employ two popular data management tools, which are Elasticsearch and MongoDB. And finally, the data visualization services will create a customizable and interactive dashboards that will provide graphical representation of all the stored information. And this is achieved through Kibana, which is the tool responsible for supporting all the data visualization services. Okay, that's all from my side for the first part. I will now pass the floor to Elena from Sermas, who will present the data anonymization process.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elena Arredondo. I'm a civil engineer working as an innovation manager in the hospital Clínico San Carlos in Madrid, Spain.
Elena, I will change the slides because it's not working again.
Thank you.
Just let me know when you need to change.
Okay. We are going to talk about data anonymization because in this project we are going to use different data sets that comes from different sources of information all around Europe and perhaps outside Europe. So why is it important to have the anonymization procedures in mind? Because the project and all its partners are subject to a very strict regulation. It's the GDPR, that includes very important financial penalties. So we have to comply with the GDPR. It's mandatory. The pseudonymized data remains personal data. So in that case, the treatment of patients' personal data for purposes other than healthcare requires in many cases the express consent of the patients through an informed consent. Proportionality, another special condition and guarantees that cannot be ensured in all status. Then, the protection and audit measure of information systems with personal data are very complex and demanding. For that reason, pseudonymization is not a sufficient guarantee in a massive data processing project. The most appropriate approach is therefore to work with anonymized data, non-personal data, that it's no longer subject to the strict regulation of the GDPR, although its protection remains strategic for the project. Next slide, Antonio, please. The anonymization process. Inside COVIDx, the partners have developed a guide to help the consortium members and the third parties from the open calls to anonymize their data. The guide is a mandatory reference framework that shows techniques and examples to carry out the process. The person responsible for the quality of the anonymization process will be each partner responsible for the data under their own responsibility. So each partner will sign a responsible declaration that the data provided to the consortium and third parties, SMEs, has been anonymized according to the specification of the guide or to the GDPR or the local normal, and is therefore no longer considered personal data. So I want to highlight this point because, yes, every partner, every third party that it's going to be part of the COVIDx program will sign a responsible declaration that the data provided it's been fully anonymized. For that reason, the COVIDx consortium and third parties can never receive access to personal data because they would become responsible for those data. In that case, we will have to sign bilateral agreements about data controller and data processor roles and responsibilities. So this is the reason why we are going to require that all the data provided to COVIDx, it must be fully anonymized. Next slide, Antonio, please. The anonymization process. These are steps of the process. At the beginning, there will be raw personal data. The responsible will be the clinical partner or the health center that is accompanying the team solutions. Then there would be a pseudo-anonymized repository. In that case, this is still personal data, and the responsible are the clinical partner and the same health center. Next step, it's the anonymization process. Then all the data will be in a repository. The responsible, the stand, would be also the clinical and the research partner. And finally, the data fully anonymized will be included or uploaded in the Federated Sandbox. That it's going to be the tool using in COVIDx program. Okay, next slide, Antonio, please. As I said before, we have developed an anonymization guide that we will provide to all the third parties that becomes member of COVIDx program. In this anonymization guide, we will find the team organizational roles, participants and the roles. We will find guidelines for the anonymization team training, what they should know for a correct anonymization. We will explain what is a privacy impact analysis. We explain as well that we have to focus on risk. Then there's also an explanation about or examples about organizational measure, techniques for anonymization and use case, and other additional guarantees. So we will provide an anonymization guide to all third parties. in case they need assessment of the anonymization process. Next slide, Antonio, please. Conclusions. We have to keep in mind that COVIDX consortium cannot accept data that it's not anonymized, because among other things, it would become responsible for it. It should be based on a privacy impact analysis as a starting point. It's not a general process. It must be adapted to each study. Additional guarantees must be established, and all the anonymization process must be auditable. So thank you, everyone, and I give the floor to the rest of my colleagues.
Thank you, Helena. This is Alexander from 8Bells. I will introduce you to the security services of the Sandbox. Let's begin with the first slide. We have already explained about the importance of data anonymization for this project, and we will focus on this section of the webinar to the security of the Sandbox. On the next slide, we'll have the Sandbox Security, where it focuses on the three core security principles known as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Mainly, security is applied to the APIs of the and connections of the Sandbox, to the user management, and to the network traffic. Let's begin with the APIs and connections. We have encryption for the connections between the Sandbox. The COVIDX Sandbox provides data ingestion and access APIs, which conform to a REST API architecture. All inbound and outbound connections use the HTTP layer along with SSL enabled. We have addressed three types of communication: communication between the nodes inside the Sandbox, communication between the Sandbox interface and the users, and communication between your solution and the Sandbox. All these communications are encrypted via SSL. Moving on to the next slide, we will focus on the user management and authentication. It is an important feature of the Sandbox because the authentication means that we will be identifying and verifying a user by their credentials. The COVIDX Sandbox will only have a well-defined number of users, which will explain the reason on the next slide. And the end management system will also be accompanied by a role-based access system. This role-based access system will help us authorize users by assigning the privileges to the roles of each user. We are responsible to assign these roles, and we will have specific permissions for each user. Our main principle is to use the minimum privileges needed for each user in order to avoid any scenarios of malicious activity. Moving on to the next slide. The third important security service is the network traffic monitoring by an intrusion detection system. This system is used to monitor the network traffic of the COVIDX Sandbox. Its activity on the traffic is considered an event, and this event is tracked and logged inside the Sandbox. These logs will be available to us, and we will be able to visualize them on a customizable dashboard. In more detail, these events are filtered by specific rules. And these rules, when they are broken, they produce alerts, which notifies us for the abnormal behavior inside the Sandbox. So to summarize briefly the main points, the COVIDX Sandbox is resistant to cyber attacks because, as we said, the appropriate anonymization techniques are advised. So we have a small risk of re-identification. We will only have authorized users to prevent any eavesdroppers. As system owners, we are clearly defining the roles and the privileges for each user inside the sandbox. And that it means that each user will have access only to the data sets that they will be using for their solutions. In addition, the sandbox components will be using the latest stable versions in order to avoid any vulnerabilities and exploitations. We keep that in mind, and we have the system detection for the traffic of the sandbox to detect abnormal behavior and produce alerts beforehand. Furthermore, activity logging is also in place that complements the network traffic detection system, and we're also having trainings and on the sandbox tools in order to avoid any misuse and be more familiar with the COVID-19 sandbox. That is all from my side. Thank you. I'll pass the floor now to Sylvia.
Hi, my name is Silvia from Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. As we have said before, this approach of the platform will include the deployment of federated learning and validation edge nodes for enabling remote and secure retraining and validation of the relevant AI algorithms that the third parties may want to include. So let me briefly explain the idea behind this. As you can see in the figure, we will be able to have different nodes with their own data and according to a specific security policies in each of the premises. And suppose that we have to do some data calculation in each of the nodes in an individual way. So each node will reach a specific solution, not very accurate because we have only few samples. So the first solution would be to move the data to a central server and then start the processes. But in the health environment like this one, this is not usually possible. So we need to not to move the data, but to share the models for creating a new one. So can you move to the next, please? So for doing so, we will create a federated learning service to be developed in each of the nodes that will have this mainly this structure, where the main module will be the worker in charge of interacting with the central federated learning and to providing the tools for training the models, communication, data management, data discovery, and so on. And for building it, we are going to use already existing open sources frameworks, mainly PySIF, PyGrid. So regarding the integration of the third parties that the UPM is also leading, we will provide different solutions for the ingestion, and we will then expose some of the functionalities through COM, as you can see. In the top of the figure, you can see that we are going to provide some solution for the ingestion of the data into the platform. And in the bottom of the figure, you can see that through COM, we are going to be able to access the data and also to make the visualizations that we may want. So move to the next one, please. So In particular, Kong is an API gateway that allows different services on the same port by using different paths according to the specific authentications. And we are going to use it for exposing the different services for accessing and visualizing the data. For the data ingestion, we will involve log stars, as Temi said before, with two types of ingestion, the streaming and the batch-like ingestion. And for the accessing to the data, we are going to provide a specific API for accessing to the data through Elasticsearch. And finally, for the data visualization, we are going to expose Kibana and some of the functionalities for data visualization through Kong. And
Sandbox also offers, as I mentioned before, a CI/CD environment that is utilized for supporting the integration of all other software components using and following the CI/CD best practices. This environment, as you can see in the figure, is implemented as a software stack composed of the tools, mostly open source tools that support the entire software lifecycle processes. And here you can see the list of these tools. First, we use a private GitLab group and private GitLab repositories as the source code repositories. We use Jenkins as the CI/CD server that supports and enables all the necessary tasks, such as automated building, automated testing, and deployment. Docker actually is the preferred environment for bundling the developed services and components into containers using some de facto standards. JFrog Container Registry is used for storing and distributing binary files or any other produced artifacts, such as Docker images. And finally, we use Portainer, which is a popular open source tool which offers a web graphical user interface for monitoring and managing all the deployed Docker containers. Okay, so this was the presentation, the technical introduction to the COVID X Sandbox. I guess that we can move to the Q&A sections. There are already some questions on the Q&A section and the chat. Antonio, will you give the floor?
The question is asked by an anonymous participant,
Okay.
so I cannot give the floor to.
Okay, no problem.
Anyway, but
I can then read it and answer the question. The question is, may I ask which kind of container orchestrator are you using for the Sandbox infrastructure? Well, as I just described on the CI/CD environment, the Docker is the preferred option for implementing this Dockerized environment, supporting all the Dockerized software applications. So any software application which will be integrated into the Sandbox infrastructure and Sandbox platform must be Dockerized. Okay, and there is another question on the chat. Is there a pre-release sandbox that we can use now to perform connectivity? Actually, unfortunately, this cannot be done. we as a consortium support a centralized cloud-based version of the Sandbox that will be used for supporting supporting all the services that were presented, and we also support local deployments of the Sandbox services, but this process will be done for the onboarded parties of this consortium. Okay, I don't see any other questions on the Q&A section or the chat. Do you have any other questions? Perhaps you can even raise your hand and take the floor to pose a question. Okay, I
So
guess,
it seems that we don't have any more questions.
Yeah.
Does this mean that everybody has understood everything?
There is a question from Parisis.
Yes, hello. Thank you for presentation of the Sandbox. It is very clear. Regarding the application, what we should mention, what we should write about the integration of our platform with the Sandbox. So what do you expect from us? I understood clearly how it works, how the anonymization should be, and follow the restriction for anonymizing the data before shared with you. Do you expect anything else on the application about the Sandbox? Thank you.
I think I can pick on this.
Okay.
So, but from the point of view, so there are actually two stages where we ask different or more detailed information on the second one. On the first one, on the first application, so the one that you have to fill now, you need to highlight or to provide a high-level plan on how your solution will integrate with the COVID Sandbox. So we don't need too much detail, but we need, let's say, an assurance that you are planning to integrate the Sandbox with your solution, so that we can see if the integration makes sense and can be achieved in the time frame of the project. On the second phase of the call, we request more detailed information on this. Sophia, do you want to add?
Yes. So integration could be, actually we are providing through the Sandbox some core data-driven services. One way is to integrate your solution, software integration, that is, in order to take to exploit the services that we provide. These are data integration services, of course, content annotation services, management, then of course querying respective data from what has been cataloged in order to feed your solution, to validate, and use also the federated learning as well as the visualization services for both retraining and optimizing your model, and there of course for specific data sets that will provide different ones, and for visualizing the results. So if you already have some parts already implemented, for example, visualization services, this could be a separate application integrated and you use your own dashboard. But for example, accessing the data, etc., that will be ingested. If you're a team solution, your clinical partner will ingest the data into the Sandbox and you will be using them through our own APIs, data access APIs. If you're a single solution, then we will serve the data that we provide from our clinical partners through the Sandbox. So this is the minimum type of software integration as we see it, but then your solution needs to be deployed together with the Sandbox on either the cloud deployed version or the local deployed version, accordingly to what will be the choice there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you both.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very clear.
Inigo, to make this more interactive, if you could have the floor and explain your question, it would be brilliant. So Inigo is asking if we can, go ahead, please.
Yes.
You have the, thank you.
May I answer, or are we going to wait?
Yes, but Parisi says, okay, so let's wait for.
Sorry, Antonio, I couldn't understand. Did you ask anything to me?
No, I think only if your questions are not answered, but I was asking another participant, Inigo,
No,
I
okay.
think I said the name well.
From my side, everything's clear. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Inigo, can you please ask your question? Hello? So, Sophia, you may answer, please.
Yes, actually, there is a first release of the Sandbox. There are some APIs that the applicants of the first open call will be using. But for the prospective applicants of the second open call, these are not available, I'm afraid. But what is available is a high-level definition of the REST API so that you know what is implemented and how you can access it. I mean, the specification, not the actual service. Of course, you will get access once you are accepted. Hello? And then you are.
Sorry, I think that you are not listening me before.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we are.
I was asking about some simple samples.
Okay. So the specification. Okay.
Get information to get interacting with the Sandbox. With REST API proceeding from my client side. Okay.
Yes, if they are not already within the open call, there are some such documents that we have described at high level via REST API documentation of what could be served with respect to data access points primarily and points.
Excuse me, can you share the link? Where is that documentation?
I don't know, Antonio, has it been a part of the open call documents, this one, or if not, then we can share it.
It's in the F6S application form. There are three documents shared. One of them is the specification of the COVID Sandbox, where you can find these examples.
Okay, thank you very much.
So do we have any other questions for today? Well, if not, Blanca shared some information on the chat that I will reinforce for everyone. So we have another webinar tomorrow. The purpose tomorrow is to present the clinical partners inside the consortium, their expectations in terms of applications they will receive, and it will give you also a chance to ask questions about the data sets to the clinical partners. If you are trying to apply as a team solution, but you don't have a clinical partner yet, so we are helping you in two ways. The first one is the LinkedIn group, which you can find the link on the chat, but also you can post your queries on the F6S discussion page. But I think that the primary point of entry would be the LinkedIn group. And as Blanca mentioned, the recordings will be available in a couple of hours on the link that Blanca provided. And I think that's it for today. If you have any other questions, I will give the floor to Themis to close the session.
Thank you, Adonio, and thank you everyone for attending. So see you all tomorrow on tomorrow's webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.